Welcome back, everyone, to Random Thoughts. We're coming to you today with another Diamond deck breakdown in Runestrike. This time around, since it's kind of the theme of the season, at the time of this recording, we're getting close to what's probably the second largest pagan holiday worldwide in Halloween. It's time for those spooky, scary skeletons, so let's jump into a Morelich build. This time around, I actually remembered to start on the champion page, although it kind of doesn't matter for this guy. Morlich actually was a deck that I reached Diamond with way back, like a few patches ago, quite honestly, but I had not produced a video because I had intended to come back to it and rework the deck and maybe do it all over again and that sort of thing. But I wanted to squeeze this in the spooky season as we're leading up to Halloween. So here we are. Now, as mentioned, there are a number of things that I kind of wanted to change about this deck. So as a result, we'll highlight those when we get to it. Now, Morelich has a number of very interesting things in his kit, but also one that was recently changed, although it's maybe not so recent anymore, in the champion rebalance, and that's his A3. But let's start at the top with Reanimate. So Reanimate is a 2-cost blood ability that target friendly minion gains berry, summon an armored skeleton in this slot. And the armored skeleton here, as you can see, is a 3/1 that shows up with a shield. This ability is actually surprisingly good. You can create a very sticky board with just a couple of blood and then ensure that you're constantly threatening something. It's very difficult for your opponent to, for example, utilize blitz minions in order to remove things, because then, oops, the blitz minion gets eaten for free because the skeleton will pop out at end of turn when they can't interact with it, and then you just get a free attack. Plus, it continues to swell your board with undead that, as you'll see, is very important. Now you have to be careful about not spamming this because you very much need blood for A2, and that's Unholy Sacrifice. Destroy target friendly minion. Deal damage to all enemy minions equal to that minion's attack. Now, whether that's through a buff, it's its natural attack, whatever it happens to be, Unholy Sacrifice is your consistent board clear. Now, I've mentioned many times on stream and in previous breakdowns that blood abilities are the most important thing in Runestrike. Your champion defines what realms you can use and what blood abilities you have access to. Every game you sit down with 3 cards, we'll say, that start in your hand in A1, A2, and A3. Now, obviously, you have to dance around the abilities, but not only do these abilities not go to the void, they're often incredibly powerful. So they're both consistent and strong. You can kind of see where I'm going with it for how important these are. And Unholy Sacrifice is kind of the poster child for this. You get way more board clears than any other deck as a result of this ability, and you need to use it to its fullest extent to ensure that you actually get the value out of it. There are a lot of ways that you can do cute things. You could also dodge corruption. You could also, like any negative debuff, you could, if something gets flesh to soiled, okay, well, I'll pop that and get the Goliath out right now if your opponent was avoiding it. There's a lot of edge case scenarios that add up to, I don't want to say a majority of scenarios, but a significant amount that allow you to do cool things as a result of this ability on top of having access to a consistent and almost persistent board clear. Now, the last ability, A3, I actually didn't have unlocked when I made the climb, and I'll be honest, I haven't really used it. I haven't seen it that much, but it does present a lot of potential, and that's Feast of the Dead. Enchant a friendly slot. Occupying undead bury your other undead, get +2 attack. So you're kind of getting, that 4/2 guy with Resurrect that we'll talk about in a little while. You get that on a slot, and right now there's really no way to interact with these enchantments. So you have something that is going to gain you continual value, or hypothetically continual value and pressure via this enchantment. It costs 4 blood, so it's not cheap, but it's not the most expensive thing. Honestly, I haven't really used it because when I made my climb, this ability did not exist. His A3 did something entirely different, and I didn't even have it at the time. I think that this does present a lot of potential, but honestly, I think you're funneling most of your blood into A2. It's just that good. So those are the blood abilities for Morlich. Let's jump into the cards themselves. Now, there are a variety of things in this list that probably wouldn't be there if I had the appropriate upgrades. Now, again, a lot of them are going to be legendary, but they don't necessarily have to be. And we'll talk about that when we get into the alternative section. But we'll go card by card for now. Now, one of the things that I found with this deck is that you can be somewhat card hungry. Enter Bloodbane. Target friendly minion is destroyed. Draw runes equal to its attack. It also costs 1 blood. So for 0 mana and 1 blood, you kill one of your minions, and then you draw a bunch of cards. This can be challenging to try and address because you do run into some problems with, well, am I messing with my blood count? Did I need that minion so I get A2? Whatever it happens to be. But drawing a few cards off this, especially if you can target a Resurrect minion, or if it's a Tomb Viper and you get additional value, or anything along those lines, means that you are able to produce a lot of value and extract a lot of value out of a single card, technically 2, and keep your gas tank full so that you can keep applying pressure, keep advancing your game plan, and ultimately close out the game. Ultimately, this is a control deck. You do need to make sure that you are keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak. You got to have fuel, and you definitely need cards. So after Bloodbane, we have Duskbolt. Now, this was kind of a concession to my concern about aggro at the time. That being said, Duskbolt is pretty versatile since it can ultimately go face. It also, because of the drain effect, can be very helpful, and hence why it was included against aggro, not just as removal, but also as a minor life gain tool, so that way you can kind of extend the game, ensure that you're able to survive to either clear the board or play your finishers. You could probably cut this or change it to something else if needed. Next up is where the spooky, scary skeletons come in, and that's Corpse Demon. Now, Corpse Demon kind of fits a number of Halloween-themed criteria, being undead, I guess a skeleton, and also a demon. But Corpse Demon is a 2-cost 2/1 that has a berry, deal damage to all minions, including yours, equal to this minion's attack. Now, this is where the attack buffs, which will come in momentarily, will come in. In conjunction with A2, you get kind of an on-demand deal 2 to the board. However, if you leverage it with other effects, whether it's your A3, it's Infuse, it's Bone Knight, it's this, it's that, it's some other thing, you can deal an enormous amount of damage, and especially if you have multiple Corpse Demons, or, spoiler for when we get to the alteration section, Plague Lords, or other minions that also clear the board, you can set up a chain reaction to ensure that you wipe out everything. And you can do this very early on, so Corpse Demon is very important. Next up is Inspire to Arms, which I incorrectly mentioned Infuse earlier. You could run Infuse. However, I prefer Inspire to Arms because it is a board-wide buff. It's not just I stick it on Corpse Demon and then, oops, I had to 2-for-1 myself, possibly 3-for-1, possibly whatever, and go really negative on card advantage. Here, Inspire to Arms serves multiple purposes. You could utilize it with Corpse Demon, but you could also just slap it on a filled board thanks to your Reanimates, thanks to your Resurrect, thanks to your opponent just not dealing with your minions, and you can push a ton of damage. So I really like Inspire here. It has multiple and versatile uses. Next up is another undead, and that's Umbral Slasher. Remember I mentioned this is a control build? Well, this kind of fits the mold. Is this the best option? Not really. You probably want to replace this, but it does serve a useful purpose. It's a body, it's undead, so it can be buffed by later effects, whether that's Bone Knight, that's Pluto, that's A3, choose your poison. It also conveniently deals with Veil minions. Now, that may or may not come into play depending on the matchup, but 5 damage does tag a fair number of them, whether it's Jade Knight, it's various pixies, it's a Gorgon sister, whatever. You just need to get rid of that thing. Let's take it down with an Umbral Slasher. Or it could, of course, chop things into range for your other board clears. You can deal 5 to a specific minion by playing this and A2ing it. You have a lot of flexibility. Next up is Sickle Stalker. You know the drill. After Sickle Stalker, we have Tomb Viper, which I mentioned in other deck breakdowns is one of my favorite cards. I just think the artwork looks spectacular. But beyond that, it also is, again, an undead. It's a sizable body that you don't mind blocking with either. It's an okay threat, but with A2, it represents deal 3 to your opponent's board and give something suffer 2. So there are a lot of ways, again, similar to Corpse Demon or Umbral Slasher, that you can get multiple uses and extend the value of your minions. I really like this thing, and I would suggest including it, maybe going down to 1 just to find room. Next up is Bone Knight. Now, even if we weren't on an undead theme, Bone Knight has made its way into a lot of my shadow builds because it allows you to have a sticky threat. And, of course, shadow, you're going to have some other undead laying around, even if it's another Bone Knight. Now here, because you get extra value out of A2, you have even more uses for it. And you can set up silly plays like play Bone Knight, buff my board, pop Bone Knight with A2, buff my board again, get in for 1,000,000. Or even really late in the game, turn 8 on, you could play Inspire Arms as well as Bone Knight. And then it's, and assuming you pop it with A2, it's like +6 to your board. That's a lot. You can pressure and threaten a lot of damage when you suddenly decide as Morlich, yeah, the game's going to end now. Next up is Iron Bull. I don't think this really needs an explanation or introduction. Just really strong. After that is Nightmare. Again, a control deck. We want removal. There's a number of other removal things that could be in here, such as Serve the Shadow, although it's removal. It's, of course, a corrupt effect, but it's very strong. Nightmare here actually has the potential to straight up remove something from the board, but also allows you to conjure demons, a number of which overlap as undead, whether it's other corpse demons, or it could be plague lords, or it could be other things. Even if it's not, you just take the most appropriate demon, and it's exactly what a control build wants. Card advantage. After that, we have one of the featured legendaries here, and that's Revenant King. There are a number of legendaries that should be in this deck. Just go keyword search undead. Trust me, you'll find some. Revenant King provides a way to end the game, as mentioned, on demand. If you played a Bone Knight and you already had an undead on board, you're talking about a 4-2 with speed, and then probably at least another 4 attacker. It could have been a Corpse Demon. It could be 5 if it was an Umbral Slasher. It could be 5 if it was a Tomb Viper, or if they got buffed with Pluto, which we'll get there. Any number of things where you can ultimately, again, present a super dangerous board that just says, hey, the game's ending right now. I've decided. And Revenant King allows you to do that. Now, that being said, honestly, the undead-related legendaries that are not in the deck, I feel are more powerful than this guy. So if you had to choose between crafting, I'd probably go with those. Plus, they're more universally useful, but I digress. Next up is Avenging Angel, which, again, is a threat. It potentially helps lock down the board thanks to Resurrect. It also pairs very well, as you'd imagine, with your A2. Deal 6 to your opponent's board, deal 4 to them while leaving a threat on the board that's also, if your opponent manages to deal with it, going to damage them again. Yes, please. Very strong. After that, we have another legendary in Horus. Look, Horus is just good. Horus is very strong. Again, there are times when, as a control deck, and by times I mean pretty much every game, where you go, yep, I've allowed you to have your fun. I've now decided the game is going to end. And now my heavy hitters come in to do exactly that. Now, the last card we're going to close the deck out with is Pluto. As you can see, it clearly plays well with both the undead and demon theme. Demons are kind of a sub-theme here, but they come up occasionally. It's not uncommon, actually, that I had to hard cast this thing, which you're not going to be happy about. Yes, it has the war cry, but don't be afraid to just play it on an empty board. He's still a 9/7. That will close the game out in short order of its own volition, whether your opponent does something or not. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, you're just kind of hoping that you don't mulligan into him or something like that, because womp womp, no surface. So those are all the cards in the existing list. Let's take a look at what we can change for it. There are a few suggestions here that I'm going to bring up that just didn't exist at the time that I made Diamond with this deck, so now there are even improvements that can be made to it, and one of them is over there in Warhorn's Blessing. Warhorn's Blessing gives you a lot of flexibility as well as being relevant both early and late. If it's early in the game, sure, you're a control deck. You don't need to establish a board position. You're reacting to your opponents, and you could just Warhorn's Blessing for whatever's appropriate. But if you top deck it late, you could easily pick up an 8-cost minion, or of course anything lower than that, and play it in the same turn. Or if you're stable, just play it, pick the super high end, or a get out of jail free card such as Set, and you're off and running. Technically, you could get 9s because it reduces cost, but there are a lot of benefits to playing Warhorn's Blessing, so I think it should definitely be considered for this deck. What's an army of the undead if you don't have a graveyard to go with it? Or in this case, I guess a mausoleum, or realistically a crypt. I mean, it says it right on the card, right? Crypt Bones also did not exist when I made Diamond with this deck, and I think it fits pretty well. The synergy is glaringly obvious, kind of clobbering you over the head with A2, where you just have a constant stream of minions to fling at your opponent and deal 2 to their board if necessary. Or it just fills your board with skeletons, and then, oh, I left one slot open. Woe is me, I'll just play a Bone Knight, and then all of a sudden those skeletons are significantly more threatening, and or play a Revenant King later in the game. It also helps you stabilize earlier on by just creating blockers, if nothing else, to drag the game out to later in the game, later stages of the game. So I think Crypt Bones is definitely something worth taking a look at. And now for something completely new, let's talk about something from the Den of Thieves season, the current season, and that's Cave Raider. Now, there are a variety of other neutrals that, compared to other decks, that could actually go in here that aren't even legendary status, but I want to point out Cave Raider over there, our resident wannabe Indiana Jones, because it's an early drop, again, similar to Warhorn's Blessing, helps fill out the early part of the game, as well as being something that is relevant potentially later in the game. Sure, you have to jump through some hoops to make that Golden Idol go away so that you can get the god off of it. Keep in mind what Golden Idol does. But you have a lot of splash damage due to all of the AoE effects. And it's not that difficult to go, oh, well, I want to clear your board anyway. I played Golden Idol on 2. I'll play Avenging Angel and wipe your board and get a god in the process. It seems like there's a lot of ways to leverage this, on top of the fact that at worst, it's a 2/3 body that you end up sacrificing to throw at your opponent anyway. It also conveniently survives unbuffed corpse demons, so there's something to consider there. Now, of course, there are plenty of other cards that you could potentially include and ways to improve this deck. There are a lot of undead and other cards that I did not have access to when I made this climb, but the power of Morlich's A2 is that strong. So let's talk about some overall thoughts about the deck. As mentioned a few moments ago, there are a lot of different ways that you could take this, sort of. A lot of different ways that you could take it, as long as all those ways come back to A2. While I could see, and I did have a lot of success very early on with A1, and clearly as mentioned, I haven't really played around with A3, but I think there's potential there. Ultimately, the deck revolves around A2, and the ability to destroy your own minions on command is super powerful, whether it's for the board clear, it's to avoid debuffs, or just to free up a spot. There are a lot of different ways that you can utilize A2 effectively, and it's almost worth including some of the blood generation to consider it. So that's another thing you can look at. But ultimately, this deck plays like a very board control heavy control deck. It sometimes will do unfair things in that I pooped out a bunch of undead, and then I played Bone Knight, and then I played Revenant King. Or if you have the souped up versions and you're able to play March of the Undead, maybe you just fill the board with a bunch of undead and close the game out from there. Because, oops, I drew Pluto, or you remove one guy and I played Revenant King. Or I just bury you under mountains of card advantage because all of my minions are a potential board clear. Morelich was a deck that I was very excited to play, and I enjoyed playing very much. So, with that, we're going to close up for today. But as always, everyone, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and Black Lives Matter.